My name is Caroline Whitman, and I never expected to be the kind of woman who needed to outmaneuver her own husband. But life, I've learned, doesn't always give you what you expect. It gives you what you need to wake up, to fight, to survive. I'm 48 years old, a successful author, a speaker, a woman who built her own empire from nothing more than a laptop and a library card. And until a few weeks ago, I was also someone's wife. I met Jonathan Whitman 21 years ago in a bookstore in Charleston. He wasn't my usual type, too polished, too smooth, but he made me laugh, and at the time I mistook charm for character. We were young, and I was naive. But as I grew, as my books began to climb the bestseller lists and royalties began to roll in, I realized I was living with a man who loved the idea of my success more than he loved me. Still, I stayed. You don't just walk away from a 2-decade marriage overnight. But then came the smile. It was subtle, barely noticeable unless you were looking. A small curl at the corners of Jonathan's mouth when he thought I wasn't watching. A smile that didn't touch his eyes. Not warmth, not joy, but calculation. We were sitting across the table at our favorite steakhouse, one of those high-end places with dim lighting and waiters who remember your wine preferences. He was pretending to listen as I talked about the conference I'd been invited to in Geneva. But his eyes were far away. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at it. Too quickly, too defensively. "Work?" I asked. He nodded, smiling again. That same hollow smile. Just a client issue. Nothing big. But it was big. He didn't know it yet, but I had already started seeing the signs. A sudden change in his calendar passwords. Late-night calls ending with, "I'll handle it, don't worry." And worst of all, I'd found a draft email, unsent but open, on his tablet titled, "Preliminary Discussion, Divorce Settlement." That was the moment I realized my husband was planning to leave me. But he wasn't just planning to leave me, he was preparing to strip me bare. The next morning, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I poured myself a cup of coffee, pulled out a legal pad, and called the one person I knew I could trust more than anyone else in this world. Vivian Price, my attorney of 17 years and the sharpest legal mind in Manhattan. She answered on the first ring. "I was hoping this call would come one day," she said without missing a beat. "Caroline, let's not waste time. Tell me everything." I laid it all out. The draft email. The bank accounts suddenly co-signed. The change in his demeanor. Vivian listened, silent and focused. When I finished, she took a breath and said, "You have 7 days. Maybe less. He's going to file before the fiscal quarter closes, so he can maximize claims over your assets. You need to move. Fast." That was the moment I stopped being Caroline Whitman, best-selling author, and became Caroline Whitman, strategist. Jonathan thought he married a dreamer. What he didn't know was that behind every novel I wrote, behind every character arc, every plot twist, I was also planning, strategizing, imagining scenarios, solving problems. Now I had a real one. Vivian came over that night. We spread out my financials across the living room floor like we were plotting a heist movie. "Your trust is still under your name only. That's our leverage," she said, circling a section with her pen. My father, God rest his soul, had always warned me to keep some things in my name alone. "Marry with love, but plan with logic," he used to say. At the time, I thought it was cynical. Now it felt prophetic. Within 48 hours, we had begun to move the money. Not illegally. Nothing Jonathan could contest in court, but tactically. Securely. Pieces shifted to international accounts. Others into charitable foundations that bore my maiden name. Property titles rewritten. Stocks moved. Some assets liquidated quietly and repurchased in blind trusts. And all while I smiled across the breakfast table like nothing was wrong. "Are you okay?" Jonathan asked one morning, halfway through his orange juice. I looked up, feigning distraction. "Oh, just thinking about my next book." He smiled. That same smile again, calculated and cold. He thought I was slipping. That I was blind. That I was weak. But what he didn't realize was that I'd already built the escape hatch and set the house on fire behind me. A week after I moved the final chunk of my estate into a legally bulletproof holding structure, Jonathan came home with that look in his eyes. The one that said, "Today is the day." He sat me down in the living room and cleared his throat dramatically. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he began, like he was reading from a script. "About us. About where we're headed. I think it might be time we have a serious conversation." I nodded. "I think so too." That threw him off, but only for a second. He recovered quickly. I think it's best if we part ways, he said, watching me carefully. I'll be fair. We'll split things amicably. I smiled. Of course, I said softly. Just know, I've already handled the financials. His eyes twitched. I beg your pardon? I know, Jonathan, I said, leaning forward. About the emails, the plans, the lawyer meetings. You were never as careful as you thought. His face went pale. I moved everything. You won't touch a dime. There was a long silence. Then, you can't do that. That's legal, I interrupted. Thanks to the trust you never paid attention to. Thanks to the foundation you signed off on 5 years ago without reading. And thanks to the fact that I was smarter than you gave me credit for. He stood angry now. You think this is over? No, I said calmly. I think it's just beginning. But the difference is, I'm not afraid anymore. That night, he didn't sleep in the same room. By morning, he was gone. What followed was a brutal 6-month divorce process. Ugly, expensive, exhausting. He tried everything. Claimed mental duress. Tried to subpoena my publishers. Dug through old tax filings. Even attempted to claim that I owed him compensation for emotional labor. But he lost. Because you can't steal what's already been moved out of reach. Because he underestimated the power of a woman who decides she's not going to be the victim. Here is part 2 of your 14,000-word emotionally charged story about Caroline Whitman. I used to think divorce was a quiet, clean break. A sad but inevitable ending to a love that had run its course. But I was wrong. Divorce, at least the one I went through, is war. A psychological chess match, where every smile is a bluff, every word a weapon, and every hesitation a potential downfall. Jonathan didn't go quietly. He never intended to. The morning after our confrontation, he moved into a luxury hotel downtown, likely assuming that after a few weeks of intimidation, legal firestorms, and manipulation, I'd cave. That I'd soften. That I'd crumble. But he didn't know me anymore. He only remembered the woman who used to beg him to talk when he'd go silent. The woman who second-guessed herself every time he grew cold. The woman who apologized just to keep the peace. But that woman was gone. The first move came through my lawyer. Vivian Price received the petition before lunch. Jonathan had filed for divorce citing irreconcilable differences. A standard play. But what came attached was anything but standard. A formal request to freeze all joint assets, including the entirety of our marital estate. The problem for him? He didn't realize how little of it was joint anymore. Vivian called me immediately. He's going to fight dirty, Caroline. He's asking for full access to all your accounts, claiming your funds are marital property earned during the marriage. He's also requesting spousal support. I laughed cold short. He wants me to pay him alimony? Apparently, yes. He's citing the lifestyle he's grown accustomed to. Jonathan hasn't worked in 8 years, Vivian. He hasn't lifted a finger. And that, my dear, is exactly what he's banking on. We met in court 2 weeks later. I hadn't seen him in person since the day he walked out of our home. He looked different now, tense, drawn, and visibly irritated by my presence. But I didn't flinch. I wore my power like armor. A tailored navy blue pantsuit. Hair pinned back. Minimal makeup. But my eyes, oh, they told the real story. I sat across from him in silence as the lawyers went to work. Vivian was merciless. She reminded the court that the majority of my wealth had been earned through intellectual property under contracts signed in my name alone, before our marriage. That my trust had been established long before I even met Jonathan. That he had willfully signed marital agreements without duress. That I had supported him, paid for his ventures, and never once asked for reimbursement. And she brought receipts. Emails. Contracts. Signed disclosures. One after another, she tore apart his narrative until he began fidgeting in his chair, tugging at his collar like it was choking him. Jonathan's lawyer, a man I later found out was the brother-in-law of one of Jonathan's golf buddies, tried his best to recover. He painted me as cold, calculating. Said I'd emotionally abandoned Jonathan years ago. That I had built walls, shut him out, made him feel inferior. To which Vivian simply asked, and did he feel so inferior that he was entitled to $500 million of her money? The courtroom fell silent. We walked out that day knowing it wasn't over. Far from it. But something had shifted. Jonathan had lost control of the narrative. And I had taken the first real step toward reclaiming my voice. Still, the weeks that followed tested me in ways I never imagined. Every day, new subpoenas arrived. Fishing expeditions into my finances, publishing contracts, speaking engagements. Jonathan was looking for cracks, trying to make me bleed just enough to come back to the table and settle. I didn't. I held the line. Even when the tabloids got wind of the divorce and headlines screamed, "Author's husband claims $500 million in divorce," I said nothing. I didn't react when a mutual friend sent me a screenshot of Jonathan at a private party, draped in designer suits and surrounded by whispering women. I didn't flinch when his lawyer requested a full accounting of every penny I'd earned since 2010. Because I wasn't playing to win in the court of public opinion. I was playing for peace. The hardest part wasn't the legal battle. It was the emotional fallout. I'd lie awake some nights, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I hadn't seen it coming sooner. How love had turned into leverage. How the man who once kissed my forehead while I typed late into the night now treated me like an enemy. But grief is a strange teacher. It arrives when you're strong enough to survive it. And when it does, it brings with it gifts, clarity, courage, and a level of self-respect you never knew you were missing. About a month into the trial, we had our biggest breakthrough. Vivian had found proof, emails between Jonathan and a financial advisor, discussing plans to shelter funds he hoped to acquire in the divorce. It was the final nail. She presented it with quiet fury in court, laying out how Jonathan wasn't just trying to secure a settlement. He was preparing to hide it from the IRS. The judge's tone changed that day. The tide turned. Jonathan's lawyer stopped pushing so aggressively. And Jonathan, well, he stopped making eye contact with me altogether. Our final hearing was 2 weeks later. I remember every second of it. The judge read from his notes slowly, clearly. Given the overwhelming evidence supporting the financial independence of Mrs. Whitman's estate and the plaintiff's documented intent to conceal funds post-divorce, the court sees no legal grounds to award spousal support or divide premarital assets. I didn't hear the rest. I didn't need to. I'd won. But more importantly, I'd survived. As we exited the courtroom, Jonathan brushed past me. For a moment, I thought he might say something. Apologize. Explain. Even plead. But he didn't. He just looked at me, like I was a stranger he once knew. Maybe I was. Back at home, I made myself a cup of tea and curled up on the velvet armchair by the fireplace. The same one I used to sit in while writing. And I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I was finally free. There's a strange emptiness after a war ends. You think victory will taste like champagne and feel like a parade. But for me, it felt like silence. A quiet so thick it echoed through my penthouse like a ghost brushing its fingers across every surface. The divorce was over. The house was mine. The fortune was safe. The future was wide open. And yet, I'd never felt more hollow. Not broken. Not defeated. Just tired. For 2 decades, I had built a world around Jonathan Whitman. Not just the marriage, but the life we shared. The social circles, the charity galas, the weekend getaways in Aspen, the business dinners where I let him take credit for ideas that were never his. It was all built on sand. Now that it had all collapsed, I had to start again. Not from scratch, but from truth. The first thing I did was fire my publicist. It wasn't personal. She had done her job well during the storm, controlling headlines, issuing vague statements, keeping the media frenzy at bay. But now I didn't want polish. I wanted peace. I wanted authenticity. I took 6 months off from writing. My publishers were hesitant. One even sent a subtle warning. Your readers might forget you. I didn't care. I needed to remember myself first. For the first time in years, I lived on my own terms. No meetings. No appearances. No pleasing anyone but me. I redecorated the penthouse. Not with opulence, but with warmth. I donated the Italian marble dining table Jonathan insisted we buy, even though we never hosted a single dinner party. I replaced it with a hand-carved wooden table from a local artisan. The massive portrait of the two of us in black tie attire? Gone. In its place, I hung a large canvas print of the sea, wild, untamed, beautiful in its chaos. It reminded me of who I was becoming. I started therapy. Not the kind you squeeze in between meetings. Not the surface-level, talk-it-out kind. No, this was deep work. Unpacking patterns. Questioning the choices that led me into a marriage where love felt like performance. Where silence felt safer than confrontation. Where I disappeared slowly, piece by piece, without even realizing it. And week after week, I began putting myself back together. One afternoon, while reorganizing my home office, I found an old journal, leather-bound, the edges frayed. It was the one I'd kept in my 20s when I was still trying to get published. I flipped through the pages, stunned by my own handwriting. So bold. So unapologetic. And there it was. A line I'd written nearly 25 years ago. I don't want to be saved. I want to be seen. I read that sentence over and over until the tears came. Because somewhere along the way, I had stopped wanting to be seen. I had settled for being safe. But now? Now I was ready to be both. A few weeks later, Vivian called. "There's been some media buzz again," she said carefully. "Apparently Jonathan gave an interview. He says he was blindsided by the divorce." I rolled my eyes. "Let him talk. You don't want to respond?" "No," I said softly. "Because he's still playing chess. And I've already left the board." Instead of reacting, I wrote. Not a press statement. Not a rebuttal. I began my next novel. But this time, it wasn't fiction. It was a memoir. The first chapter began. He smiled at me like I was the luckiest woman alive. But behind that smile was a plan. And behind that plan was betrayal. What he didn't expect was that I'd see it. And when I did, I wouldn't panic. I'd plan. I didn't name him. I didn't need to. The story wasn't about Jonathan anymore. It was about me. Writing it was like therapy on fire. Pages bled emotion. Nights stretched into early mornings as I typed through memories I hadn't dared revisit in years. But with every word, I reclaimed a piece of myself. When the manuscript was finished, I sent it to Vivian first. She called me the next morning, her voice choked with emotion. "Caroline, this isn't just a book. It's a weapon. A shield. A lighthouse." I smiled. Then it's exactly what I needed it to be. I titled it, Behind His Smile. My publishers were hesitant again. It's risky. It's raw. But this time I didn't flinch. I told them, publish it, or I'll do it myself. They published it. And within 2 weeks, it hit the New York Times bestseller list. But something strange happened after that. Women started writing to me. Thousands of them. Emails. Letters. DMs. Some told me they'd cried reading my story. Others said they'd packed their bags and walked out of relationships they knew were slowly killing them. One woman wrote, "You gave me permission to stop being afraid." That message changed me. Because for the first time, I realized my story wasn't just mine. It was ours. Healing isn't linear. It doesn't arrive all at once like a sunrise. It comes in waves, some calm, some crashing. Some days I still wake up and instinctively look at the side of the bed where Jonathan used to sleep. I still walk past places where we once laughed and wonder how long it was all a lie. But then I remember. It wasn't all a lie. I was real. My love was real. And now my freedom is too. I began hosting private retreats for women, quiet, intimate gatherings in upstate New York. No press. No cameras. Just women rebuilding. We talked. We cried. We shared stories we'd never dared to say out loud. And we healed. Together. One night, sitting by a campfire, a woman asked me, "How did you know it was time to let go?" I stared into the flames for a long time before answering. When the silence between us was louder than the love. The power of peace. Next, Caroline's story becomes a movement, and she learns that true strength is found not in the fight, but in the life you build afterward. Here is part 4 of your emotional 14,000-word story. Peace doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it shows up in the smallest things. Like your morning tea steeping quietly on the counter. Like the feeling of your own breath, deep, steady, unhurried. Like watching the sun rise and realizing you don't have to explain your life to anyone anymore. That was the kind of peace I had found. It didn't roar. It whispered. 6 months after Behind His Smile hit bookshelves, something unexpected happened. The book became a movement. Not a viral trend. Not a hashtag. Something deeper. Women began sharing their own stories online. Some used their real names. Most didn't. But the raw truth in their voices mirrored mine. I left after 17 years. I opened my own bank account and started saving, quietly. I'm not ready to leave yet. But I'm planning. It wasn't just about divorce. It was about awakening. And slowly I realized this was bigger than Jonathan. Bigger than me. This was about women realizing they didn't have to stay trapped in the stories someone else had written for them. I received an invitation to speak at a global women's summit in Berlin. The keynote slot. At first, I hesitated. Public speaking had always felt performative, especially when Jonathan used to sit in the front row, smiling for the cameras, pretending to support me while calculating how many books I sold per hour. But now? Now I had no one to perform for. Only something to stand for. I said yes. The stage was massive. Hundreds of seats. Media cameras. Screens projecting my face 20 feet tall. I stood behind the podium, heart pounding but hands steady, and looked out at a sea of women, each one holding a quiet storm inside them. And I said, "We are not broken because someone betrayed us. We are not bitter because we fought back. We are not selfish for choosing ourselves. We are brave for walking away, brave for rebuilding, brave for telling the truth out loud." The applause was thunderous. But more than that, I felt something shift in my chest. A weight I hadn't known I was still carrying lifted. After the summit, I was approached by several foundations, offering to sponsor women's empowerment programs in my name. Retreats, legal clinics, financial education workshops. All of it sounded amazing, but I didn't want my name on a banner. I wanted my hands in the work. So I created the Whitman Foundation. Yes, I kept the name. Not for him, but for me. Because I was reclaiming it. The foundation focused on one mission: helping women protect, manage, and grow their personal wealth, with or without a partner. Not just escape plans. Power plans. I poured myself into the work. I brought in trauma counselors, lawyers, financial advisors, therapists, survivors. We created a curriculum. We built a safe house model. We helped women not just survive betrayal, but thrive after it. And in doing so, I learned something profound. Healing is not the end of the story. Empowerment is. Some people began to question my motive. She's cashing in on her divorce. She's turning her pain into profit. But they didn't know. They didn't know about the nights I cried alone in that cold kitchen. They didn't know about the birthday he missed while he was networking in Las Vegas. They didn't know about the slow suffocation of loving someone who sees you as leverage. So I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. Because I had finally learned that peace doesn't require permission. One morning, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, a slim envelope and a silver bracelet. The note read, "You don't know me, but your book gave me the courage to leave." This bracelet was a gift from my ex. I wore it for 10 years, thinking it meant love. Today, I'm mailing it to you. Not because I want you to keep it, but because I needed to let it go. Thank you for helping me believe I deserved more. I held that bracelet in my palm for a long time. Then I walked to the edge of the pier behind my house and let it fall into the sea. Every woman who reads my story doesn't have to leave their relationship. This isn't about divorce. This is about discernment, about recognizing what's real and what's simply familiar, about choosing yourself without apology. One night while journaling, I wrote, "He didn't destroy me. He revealed me." That sentence felt like the real ending I'd been waiting for. Not of my marriage, but of the version of me that believed peace had to be earned through pain. I still live in the same penthouse, but now it feels different. The silence is no longer empty. It's sacred. It holds my laughter, my solitude, my peace. I no longer wake up wondering who I need to impress or what I need to fix. I wake up wondering how I can serve, how I can create, how I can live gently but powerfully. And sometimes when I walk past the mirror, I smile. Not the kind that hides betrayal, but the kind that says, "You made it.